But anyway, the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine is a timely reminder about the perils of big government and big government intervention in the economy. It also reminds us of the pitfalls arising from recent policy positions of both the coalition and the opposition federally. Now, while centralised procurement of the vaccine by the federal government is appropriate, the actual rollout would work far better with a clear devolution of responsibilities to state and local government, working in local communities, of course, with doctors. To paraphrase Rod Sims of the ACCC in a recent speech, the comedian George Carlin once cut to the heart of the issue when he remarked that nothing rectifies out-of-control market failures like a healthy dose of government intervention and mountains of bureaucracy. Well, the history of the Soviet Union with centralised economic planning was a dismal record of poor choice, poor productivity and shoddy outcomes for consumers through the operation of inefficient state-owned industries. And worse still, their collectivisation of agriculture in the 1930s, designed to increase food production, led to widespread famine and starvation. But back here at home in Australia, top-down command and control interventions by government also have a poor track record. There is, of course, the Rudd government's insulation program, and according to the ACCC, the interventions by state and federal government in the electricity sector have been very detrimental to the interests of consumers. So why now are the coalition proposing to intervene in the gas market and in the delivery of pipeline infrastructure? Just as bad as the ALP policy to subsidise the rollout of electric vehicles. When someone can deliver a non-subsidised electric vehicle for the same price as my wife's Toyota Yaris, we are right in there. Look, I'm exasperated because across the political spectrum, the current crop of politicians seem ready to jump into any business, any enterprise, if it can win them brownie points. And yet arguably their policies come with significant unanticipated consequences. Well, Karina, why don't you lead off? What do you reckon about my thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think you're spot on, Campbell. In terms of the rollout of the vaccine, three of us on the panel tonight have been, or currently are, in your case, Jerome, serving in local council. And we have, fantastic maternal child health services that have vaccine programs for kids and could easily be upscaled to deliver vaccines very readily for the community. But at the moment, the real issue the government is facing is supply of the vaccine, and also the other issues around the AstraZeneca vaccine too. Hence, it's not so much the delivery of the vaccine that is an issue and upscaling in that sense, but actually having supply of it to be able to administer it to people. So hopefully, as we see supply increase, we can look at, the government might consider looking at local councils being able to deliver the vaccine, because they're already doing those programs on the ground. I don't see how that could be too much more of a stretch. Local government is the one closest to the community. They already have information about constituents readily at hand.
Well, that was exactly where I was sort of coming through from. I think there's a very strong view these days that just permeates our country that all the smart people in Canberra, and I don't for a moment buy that. What do you reckon, Jerome? You're there in Sydney as mayor in a local government.
Look, Comrade Newman, I'm surprised you're swinging out against big government after what I think has been a very successful intervention by governments of all level to help us deal with the pandemic. Like, we had huge government policies and spending with JobKeeper. We've had states do huge interventions into our civil liberties to protect us from the virus. When we need big government intervention, I think in Australia we do it pretty well, and the proof's in the pudding. But if you're talking about collaboration between state, federal and local, then absolutely that needs to be done a lot better. I think the National Cabinet was a good start. What's terrible with the National Cabinet, of course, is that local government don't have a seat on it. And that's something that I know the sector is really pushing to get that seat back on the National Cabinet. But I don't think we should be afraid of big government. I think that the last 12 months has proven that, when we really need it, it can help. But, I wouldn't be calling Scott Morrison harking back to Soviet era policies, because he'll step back out when we need to, and I think that's what our community expect.
Well, Tanveer, do you want to go on with the vaccine, or do you want to go to some of my other points about policy intervention, big government policy intervention in the economy?
Look, I'm very interested.
And my central point, which is they they tend to get it wrong, I reckon.
Look, I think it's very interesting with this COVID whole period. I mean, it was very attractive to see it as giving some sort of signal that this system is better than other. You remember at the beginning where it seemed to be potential, the East Asian economies are superior in a certain way, or this is a sign of Anglo-American sort of market economy failure. So I think early on, the first 3 to 6 months, everyone was sort of reaching for some sort of signal that this is a pointer to what may work in the future. But I think now, 12 months on, I'm not sure it's given any sort of clear signals. We've seen government intervene in every type of system across the world. I think early on, even countries like America, there was a failure of big government to some extent where they should have intervened more, or you saw a lot of their public service bodies really fail. The Centre for Diseases Control, for example. Similar in Britain, where they arguably didn't intervene enough. But yet the Anglo-American economies are where the vaccines are coming from. So there's a dynamism and drive, especially around innovation, that is arguably superior, and the whole world is latching onto that. So I think it's very difficult to go, this is an absolute sign or justification. I think in Australia, you're right. I think a lot of it has to do more with the federal state. It's a real sign of our weakness in the health system, where the federal government signed the cheque, but really it's delivered primarily by state governments. So relying solely on GPs has been shown to be inadequate, where countries like America, they're vaccinating people in the Disneyland car park, and they're doing it very successfully. So, look, I'm not quite sure about the broader sweep, if you like, Campbell, at least in terms of COVID. I mean, one thing I would say, I think it's also shown that how a lot of our regulations are BS sometimes. With so many regulations, we're able to be overturned. So I think there's also an argument for some libertarian principles, where many regulations that we're stuck with were suddenly thrown out the window all over the world, and they were shown to be questionable. So I don't think any particular system has been shown to be utterly corrupt or inappropriate, if you like, but it has shown the weaknesses in a whole set of systems. So I hope we're able to take that into the future.
Campbell, you talk about government intervention in the gas industry. One area which I think our community is expecting big government intervention is if we're able to perhaps produce a vaccine here locally in Australia. Our community would want the government to step in, would want to be big government to get that off the ground. So we're not relying on Europe or America to give us these doses of the vaccine, which we don't seem to have.
Look, I certainly agree with you there, mate. I think, though, that it's just... Sorry, Corinne, I'll just finish this thought and come to you. But I think that what my point, though, is that there's two bits to this. There's getting the vaccine, tick, that can only be handled really centralised, and I agree with you about local production. But then the actual program, I mean, I think local government are the people who could be delivering this and doing the large sort of scale vaccination centres in local sports facilities, community centres, with obviously the local GPs. Karina?
I just wanted to pick up some of the points that were made about big government. I'm very scared about big government. I mean, it should be the people that the government answers to, not the people, so the government answering to the people, not the other way around. But some of the policies that you picked up on, the pink bats policy, for example, we saw the devastating consequences of that. And, one that really, I think, comes to mind with some of Labor's new policies is the Rewiring the Nation policy, which has all the hallmarks of, the pink bats type policy, very little, very short-sighted, in fact. Perhaps, looks good, has some great headlines that accompany it, but hasn't really thought through the detail, hasn't really thought through the long-term consequences. That policy will essentially renationalise part of our energy grid, but Energy Network Australia have pointed out that some of the issues that haven't been looked at are, for example, the regulation that is causing lack of investment in our energy sector. Also, issues with that kind of policy around whether, what will be the risks for the country if we enter into a policy like that? What will be the cost-benefit analysis around that? Will there be any benefit to consumers? So these types of big government interventions, especially when there's a lot of thought bubble going on, fancy headlines that might come out of it, but little detail backing it up, little thinking through about the consequences for the country, that is where it gets scary. And we can see consequences like what happened under the pink bats style policy happening into the future. So I think we should be very wary of big government intervention, Campbell. And as I said from the start, you're spot on with your editorial.